Welcome to Dreams and Ladders, the podcast for women in male-dominated fields who want to lead with confidence, make an impact, and thrive in meaningful, challenging work. If you're ready to rise without burning out, excel as the leader you know you're meant to be, and stop feeling like you have to do it all alone, you're in the right place. It's your time to lead, thrive, and rise. In our last episode, I told you a story about applying for a position and being told, you know, dear, you're going to get your fingernails dirty. Well, that was over 30 years ago. But unfortunately, not much has changed. A couple of years ago, I had recently been promoted and I had worked really hard for that promotion. It was a lot of hours of preparation to get through the exam process and the interview process required to get to that position. And it was COVID times. We were doing our first management meeting. So I'm in a new unit. It's a new department, new boss, new management team, new people that I'm supervising. Everything is new. And I wanted to put my best foot forward. There's the usual anxiety that comes with being in a new position, but I was determined to show up as myself and confident and ready to take on the role. And then here we are in this first meeting. And my boss says, I'd like to welcome Lori to the team. This is her first meeting with us. So Lori, are you going to paint your office pink? And I didn't know what to say. I was so taken aback that here we are in the 2020s and I have a boss asking me if I'm going to paint my office pink. Like, what kind of a crazy comment is that? I would love to know from you what's some of the craziest things that you have heard in the workplace. Shoot me an email. I'd love to hear from you. You can reach me at hello@lorikranenberg.com. I'll put that in the notes if you'd like to reach out. I'd love to hear. I'm sure some of you have some amazing stories of what you have heard in the workplace. It became a bit of an ongoing joke for us over the years about being asked if I was going to paint my office pink. But in that moment, that really set the tone for how the working relationship was going to go. And I didn't realize that one comment was going to really shape the relationship with my boss, but it turned out it did. It really underscored how he felt about women in the workplace. I found over the coming months that often he wouldn't make eye contact with me during a meeting. There was times when he would ask someone else of the same level as me to brief on my section. And that was quite frustrating because I had worked really hard to get there and I knew I was competent in what I was doing, but I wasn't being allowed the opportunity to showcase my skill set. The advantage I had was I was a little later in my career and I had a slightly different approach with how I felt about that and how much I let it affect my self-worth. But what I want to talk to you today a bit about is your self-worth and how you protect that in the workplace. Because especially as a woman in a male-dominated profession, there are all sorts of forces that are going to be working against you to strip that self-worth away from you if you let it. So let's talk about some of those different things that can come up. There's those internal voices, those negative voices inside of your head. Let's talk about those ones first. I like to tell this story about when I was a logistics officer with the Canadian Forces. One of the courses we went through had to do with knowing how to place all of the resources if you were on a field deployment. And part of that was understanding where to put all the heavy equipment and what factors to consider in placing heavy equipment. Now, immediately in my head, I thought, well, I don't know how to do this. I'm a girl. This is trucks. Like, what do I know about trucks? And I kind of laugh at myself now because, well, what difference does it make if you're a girl and it's trucks? What it comes down to is what's the length of the truck, what's the height, what's the width, and how much does it weigh? Where you're trying to park it, does it physically fit? And can the ground hold it? I mean, really, that's all it comes down to. But in my head, initially, I thought, wow, I'm not going to be good at this because I'm not a guy and it's a truck. And I'm pretty aware of gender programming. And so I can laugh at myself. That was the thought that I had when we first had that task. But I ask you, like, how many times has this subtly come up? Or maybe you're not even aware that this has come up for you, that subconsciously you think to yourself, well, I'm just not good at that because I'm a girl. That's guys' work. The guys are good at that. They were born with some sort of secret natural ability to do this thing, and I'm just going to struggle because I'm a girl. So I ask you, if this has come up for you, challenge yourself to shift that belief. What is it about being a girl that says that you can't do this, that you can't be good enough? It really is just our own internal voices, our own internal programming. And we have a choice whether or not we listen to that, or do we take the approach where we laugh and say, well, that's kind of silly, because really, when it comes down to it, it's just a truck and I can figure out where to put a truck. It's not rocket science. It's just height, length, width, weight, simple factors. And once I got over that part of it and shifted how I thought about it, I actually did quite well with the assignment. But I had to get over my own limiting beliefs. Sometimes too, we can hear these voices pop up at the most inopportune moments, like despite the fact that we have decided we're going to be confident, that we believe in ourselves, subconsciously there's something running in that back program that just pops up and goes, oh no, you're not as confident as you think you are. If I can give you an example, I'm a competitive shooter, and at the end of a string of firing 5 shots, often they'll say, are there any malfunctions? In my head, this line pops up and says, only with the shooter, kind of poking fun at the fact that I didn't have the best results that I was hoping for. But this phrase pops up, and I say this to myself, and it's not helpful. It's not helpful language. Words matter. When do you catch yourself doubting yourself when you aren't expecting it? What are those words that you're saying to yourself in the moment that are negative? Now, fortunately, I had a coach at one point in time who, if I would say something negative, they would turn around and look at me and say, can you say that in a positive way? I didn't realize it at the time, but they were really just trying to shift my language to help me with my own belief in self by just changing how I phrased things. I quickly learned I wasn't going to be able to say anything negative out loud because I would be challenged to rephrase that in a positive way that reflects growth instead of stagnating where I am. There's also that programming that exists out there in society. We know in general that women are paid less than men. What does that do to your sense of self if you know that the work you're doing in general is paid less than your male counterparts? Do you see that as a systemic problem, or do you on some level internalize that and start to believe that perhaps your work is of less value? And this is something that we really have to be careful about and catch ourselves when we start to think that way. There is an underlying bias that women somehow are less capable, less competent than men. I'm not saying it's true, but it's the underlying bias that we fight against day in and day out. It exists in society, exists in the workplace, and you might even find that it's existed for yourself at times. If you're looking to build a team, who do you default to pick to put on that team? Are you defaulting to the men first and then looking at the women, or are you looking at skill sets? And it can happen to anyone. The whole purpose of this is just to raise awareness and ask you to think a little about how do you truly look at women and their value? If you catch yourself undervaluing women, what else is running subconsciously as your own program that's undervaluing you? Now, the third area I'd like to look at with that piece of self-worth is external factors, external opinions. And I want to ask you, is relying on the opinions of others really the best way to determine your self-worth? Now, I understand why we tend to default to this. We're programmed to take in feedback from the minute we're born. Right, wrong, good, bad. We learn this as children. You touch a hot stove, you learn that's bad. Don't do that. That's feedback. You do something, and the next thing you hear is the voice of a parent saying, Lori Patricia Cranenberg. Okay, you've got my attention now. I did something wrong. That feedback mechanism is there from early childhood all the way through to basically the end of our journey in life. There's always going to be feedback coming in. But it's what do we do with that feedback, and what feedback do we actually listen to? Yes, you touch that hot stove, you're going to learn, don't do that again. But if someone tells you you're not good at something and you believe that, have we paused to look at, was that even a valid piece of feedback that we took in the first place? And this can be very challenging because we rely on feedback for our growth. The true purpose of performance reviews and 360s is growth. You get feedback on your performance at periodic times throughout the year or at the end of the year, and it should be to help you grow and develop and become better. Same with a 360 review. The whole idea is to look at where are your blind spots and to help you grow. So the purpose of feedback in that sense is growth. And without feedback, we would just be left with all of our own thoughts, and maybe we figure it out on our own, maybe we don't. So feedback does have a role, but where's the filter? Let's think about this. When it comes to self-worth, your sense of self, relying on others to determine your self-worth is like buying an expensive car and then giving an unlicensed driver the keys to drive it. If you value your expensive car, you're not going to let just anyone drive it. So why do we subconsciously do this to ourselves when it comes to self-worth? Why do we give equal weight to the feedback we're receiving that might be coming from somebody who's unlicensed to provide that feedback to you, compared to someone whose opinion you truly value, who has your best interest at mind and really wants to help you grow? This is what I've learned about protecting my self-worth. Not everything people tell you is the truth. Let's think about this for a second. What are some of the factors that are at play when someone is saying something to you about your abilities? They have their own cultural differences. They have how they were brought up, the era they were brought up in. They have their own values. They even have their own goals and perhaps what they're setting out for their own personal gain. So what comes out of their mouth is a product of their lifetime, their lived experiences, their values, their goals. This might not always have your best interests in mind. Let's think about a couple of examples. If you have a boss who grew up in an era where women's primary role was to be at home, raising children, to cook, to clean, perhaps they were in the workplace, but probably primarily in a secretarial or administrative role, what's their underlying subconscious programmed view of women in the workplace? Now, I know what you're thinking. Okay, that era is getting further and further into the past. I came up across one of those that asked me if I was painting my office pink, but yes, they are starting to age out. But they mentored people, they developed people. The next generation that is still in organizations were mentored by people who came from an era where women's role was administrative. It wasn't valued for operational thinking or technology. Women weren't in C-suite positions. The underlying view they have is that that's not where women are. Whether they consciously acknowledge it or not, that subconscious programming is there. Now, what if you have a coworker who's vying for the same promotion as you or wants to get on the same special project as you to develop skills? Is the stuff they say to you going to be valid feedback, or maybe is it colored by their own self-serving interests? Maybe if they can create a little bit of self-doubt in you, if they can crack you just a little to have you second guessing yourself, then they benefit. And what about the people who just don't like you? I don't like everybody. You don't like everybody. There's going to be people out there that just don't like you. Is their opinion of you going to be created or crafted in a way that has your best interests in mind? Or maybe it's just them saying, I don't like you, and this is what I don't like. And if we take that to heart, we're allowing these people, the people from a different era, different culture, different interests, different values, we're giving them a license to drive our own growth. And where does that take us? Let's compare this to our inner circle, those close friends, family, colleagues, the ones we trust, the people whose opinions we value. They're more likely to provide you feedback and value that has more value and meaning for you. They provide the clues on where your true strengths are and your areas for growth. However, at the end of the day, self-worth is the value you see in yourself. And while you might take in feedback from external sources, it really is about how you see yourself, the value you see in yourself. And only you can decide this. You can take in feedback and identify parts of yourself that you want to help grow, but only you can decide what you have of value and what you want to work on. I'm going to ask you, if you keep giving away your self-worth to the opinions of others, if your self-worth is decided by external factors, what happens over the long term as your self-worth erodes? What happens to your goals, to your confidence, to your relationships, to your happiness? Isn't it worthwhile to protect your innermost value and protect it from harm? To take away the keys from those who aren't licensed to shape these beliefs you have about yourself? Whose voice do you need to filter out to protect what you know to be true about you? My hope today is that you take away two things from this. The first one is catch yourself when you're thinking you aren't good enough and ask yourself where this story came from. Chances are there's some sort of long-term societal programming at play, and this is your chance to challenge those beliefs and shape new ones. And then also consider, who are you giving a license to shape your growth, and who do you need to filter out? If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and please share this podcast with someone else that you feel could benefit from this message. Until the next time, take care of yourself, be you, and do great things. Thanks for listening.